Good afternoon to you all and welcome to our webinar, a seismic shift. I'm going to explain in just a second exactly what we mean by that. Just a couple of things before we begin. So the session is being recorded, but everyone's on mute, so it isn't really going to impact any of you. And you are on mute, so the only way to ask questions, but we would definitely encourage you to do that, is to use the question functionality in the GoToWebinar add-in that you'll have had to download to be able to get into the session. So if you put any questions in there, I'm joined by Mark. He hasn't got his camera on, but he is on the line. If you put any questions in there, Mark's going to moderate it for us, and we should have time for them at the end. So the session's in the diary for an hour. We should be finished before that, so you'll get a little bit of time back and a little bit of less time on Teams and Zooms and webinar, which I'm sure will be good for all of us. I'm joined by Steph from Howden Group. So we're going to split the session into two parts, and we'll do a Q&A with Steph, and she'll introduce herself when we get to that section. So before I'm going to go into the agenda and our introductions, I just wanted to explain a bit more about what the main theme of the session is and what do we mean by seismic shift. If we think about finance, technology has been part of finance for the last 20 years, for as long as I've been working with it, and it plays a bigger and more intricate role year on year as we go through and technology improves. But what has always been true, and this has changed now with the latest generation, but what has always been true in the past is that you bought a tool for a job, you bought a point solution. If you needed to solve a consolidation problem, you bought a consolidation tool. If you needed to solve a budgeting and planning problem, you bought a budgeting and planning tool. And then you had to integrate them all together, and they were often different technologies. That was quite complicated to set up. You had to have different skills inside the organization. And then when the organization wanted to change, that was always quite complicated. And then it was difficult to upgrade all of this stuff. So that's kind of where things were. But this latest generation of technology, the next generation that we're talking about today, is fundamentally different. And it's different in a number of ways, which I'm going to come on to. But one of the main points here is that they're platform technology, so they're equally good at multiple processes, so not just one thing. So the business cases have a lot more value. They can also store a significantly more data inside these platforms, and the more data you can put in, the more analytics you can do, the more value you can add to outside of finance and to the organization. So basically the business cases can be fundamentally more valuable on the latest generation of platforms than before, and that's the sort of shift or the benefit of the shift that we want to talk about today. So that's the kind of essence of it in terms of agenda. So I'll give a quick introduction to myself and the organisation. The main meat of it is the seismic shift session, and then, as I said earlier, we're joined by a special guest, which is Steph from Howden Group. So they're on this journey already, and I thought it'd be helpful for Steph to share some of her experiences and with you guys, and give a chance for you guys to ask some questions as well. So we'll do that as a Q&A at the end. So in terms of introductions, so my name is Ash Chapman. So I am head of consulting for Inlumi. My background is a mix of industry and consulting. So I spent a number of years in group finance, and it is a mixed sort of line accounting role, consolidation reporting, budgeting and planning, and then also systems and technology. Now, 15 years ago, I moved into consulting, 8 years in PwC, doing and focusing on technology-enabled transformation, and then the last 3 years building the consulting business for Inlumi. So we're a specialist implementer of EPM technologies. This is our focus area. There's 140 of us in the locations across Europe that you can see on the map in front of you. We think of our business in three main areas. So advisory, so this is the upfront technology agnostic work that we do, strategies, roadmap, system selections, organization design, and then we apply that lens to technology implementation. There are three vendors that we work with, so Oracle, Tagetik and OneStream, because we think they're the best in the market, and then managed services is our support and hosting capabilities. So for us, it's not just about the money. We try to make the business about a bit more than that. We partner with an organization called Mossy Earth, who help us, we help them in their efforts to restore nature, fight climate change. So we plant 4 trees per month for everyone that works for us, for as long as they work for us. And then we use our projects wherever possible to either help put more trees into the ground or sponsor rewilding in initiatives like building eagles nests or radio tagging salmon, things where we can really increase our impact. And that's very important to us as a business. So onto the seismic shift, and kind of where it starts is finance has been, I mean, it hasn't stood still, right? It's been transforming and changing and improving itself as long as I've been in it or working with it as a consultant. So for the last 20 years, it's always incrementally improving or transforming in a more significant way. But what is also true is that the challenges that finance face are diverse and still exist. So, and this is the same in a way for the enterprise, for the organization itself. Market conditions are difficult, volatile, hard to predict. Last year is, I mean, just a snapshot of the type of volatility that everyone has to deal with. Organizations, in my opinion, are becoming more complex rather than more simple. They're having to deal with more difficult things. And the people and talent agenda really remains still top of the priority list. And it's about trying to equip and attract and retain the best talent in order to be able to then get the most out of those roles inside the organization, and then help the organization remain agile and respond to these volatile conditions that everyone is having to kind of live with. And there are a few statistics that I found and saw in presentations recently that I thought helped sort of characterize this. So 66% of time for finance is still spent data gathering. 86% of CFOs believe that investments in analytics projects still miss the mark. And this one's very, very difficult, which is only 13% of CFOs believe that finance has the time to be able to add value to the P&L outside of the close cycle. So quite simply, your finance is still grappling with the classic challenges of trying to gather information and not having enough time outside the close cycles to really be able to do anything of the sort of higher value add tasks that we're all kind of aiming at. So that's kind of where finance sort of sits today with some of its challenges. And then if we then sort of flip to where kind of the ambition is, then for me, it needs to be sort of quite simple, clear, and easy to understand. And I think whilst you can build a business case on a burning platform, you can create an incentive for change based on something like that, but it's very difficult to make that sustainable. I think a sort of simpler and more positive way that's easier for people to understand and sort of latch on to, because what you're trying to do is change behaviors. It's to sort of focus on the positives. So some of the things that finance is really good at. And there's a longer list here, but if I was to call out a few of them that I think are kind of relevant and important to what we're talking about today, the first one, it's not sexy or necessarily cool, but it is something that's critical, and it is something that finance is really good at and probably best placed in the organization to do, and that's data governance. And I'm going to talk about the sort of supply of information in a minute. The other thing that finance is excellent at, and you very rarely find these capabilities outside of finance or to anything like the same level of capability, it's the ability to be able to explain performance in an understandable way, the kind of storytelling element of it. And part of that comes from your finance has also been really good and very practiced in all of the modeling. So we kind of malign Excel as a tool quite often. It's sort of difficult to kind of rule and govern, but it does allow us to be able to then kind of model things inside Excel, which we've been doing for years as finance, to be able to understand and create connections between different data points, and therefore understand the levers we can pull to help improve performance. So that's just a few things that finance, and specifically finance, they're really good at, that we can use to then build the ambition of change around. And then sort of three things you can kind of aim it at, or that I would say this is about finance being able to kind of drive performance out of finance and across the organization. So it's looking broader into the value it can add to the organization, inspiring and creating its own culture of innovation, and then having access to a technology platform that not only serves the kind of needs of today, but is also then ready for the needs and the benefits of the technology changes for tomorrow. So things like, and we've all hear about them and read about them quite a lot, machine learning, AI, predictive capabilities, they're here to an extent already. You can't just plug these things in. You need a platform that's ready and able to take these enhancements and these new capabilities. And that's a lot of what we want to talk about. And that's a lot about what putting in these new platform technologies, this next generation, is all about. It's being able to be ready for and take advantage of these emerging trends as they come available. One key, though, that needs to be unlocked in that is data. And this is something, and I know it's not rocket science here, and it's everything that everyone intuitively understands anyway, but finance are uniquely positioned in the organization to see across and to be able to apply that sort of control, balance the speed and control and the governance around data So we have to turn that supply of data into insight, and they can own that process, and they have the skills to then create the insights for the organization and then provide this data where and when it's needed most inside the organization. And very specifically, the tip of the spear here that we're talking about is FP&A and the role that they can play as kind of strategic advisor and coach to the organization. So this supply chain of data is a critical component of what we're talking about. We have our own point of view on this subject. It's called intelligent performance management. And technology is important, but it's not all about technology. Technology is a catalyst for change. It's a great rally point for change. It's an enabler of change, but it's not the total story in its own right. What's also important is then acting as a broker for information, this supply chain of data I just mentioned a second ago, looking at processes that can span the organization, so not just in finance, but from finance out and across the organization, and then building this around sort of a people and talent strategy and agenda. So what we're trying to do is give the data and give the tools to people to be able to then, for them to have the time to focus on the value adding activities to be able to really help drive the organization forward. So this is kind of our point of view encapsulated together in intelligent performance management. There's a lot more detail on our website, a lot more resources that you can look into. So we have some thought leadership white papers in there. There's some blogs. There's a series of webinars and also some videos that you can look at as well. And I think in a nutshell, a lot of this is around balancing speed and control. So a couple of the things that Top Finance is really good at, trying to do things really quickly, but then also making sure the right controls and governance are in place at the same time. So when we focus the lens a little bit more onto technology itself, I think there are four things, I described at the beginning actually, but there are four things that characterize the software that makes it fundamentally different from where it was in the past. And if I go back sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I thought it was all about cloud. It was all about taking complicated, expensive infrastructure from your own data centers, putting it up into the cloud and making it someone else's problem to manage via software as a service. So it's basically a cost play was the main business case. And to an extent it was, but that was us just not fully understanding the capabilities that these new platforms had, the new capabilities that this cloud deployment was going to enable. And it's really this next point here, which is it's a single integrated platform. So as I said at the beginning, in the past, it was all about point solutions, the right tool for the job. Whereas what we have now is a platform that's equally good at multiple processes. And I'm going to talk about the sort of breadth that they can cover in the next slide. But that's the fundamental point, their platform technologies. The other really good thing is that the software vendors have been doing this for 20 years, if not more, and every generation gets a bit better than the last, and all of that capability trickles down. And where we find ourselves today is you have a lot more pre-built value, pre-built applications and functionality, increased automation that sits inside the platforms that you're buying off the vendors. And because you're buying things as a subscription, those subscription periods end and they want you to renew. They're continually adding more value, more functionality into this ecosystem, which is great for you as a customer because it reduces the amount of complexity that you have to manage and own, which increases the return on investment. So basically more and more of the problem is being shifted to the software vendors and away from yourselves as a customer, which is essentially how we consume technology as individuals, and it's the same way as it's being done in organizations today. And that's all possible because of this latest generation of technology. The next point is around XP&A. So if you haven't heard of it, that's extended planning and analysis. So in a recent Gartner report, 70% of CFOs believe in the next 3 years, all FP&A projects will become XP&A projects, so extended planning and analysis. So that's looking at operational forecasting and planning across the organization. And that's made possible by the fact that you can load in significantly a higher volume of data into these new cloud platforms than you ever could in the past. So when I used to do the hands-on inside these projects, I thought it was really sophisticated and state-of-the-art and modern when we take a 2,000 row extract from a GL in a flat file and we'd load it into a consolidation system. That felt kind of cutting edge. Now we're doing projects where we're loading 500 million records and I've got no clue how it's even possible, but it's just fundamentally different. And as soon as you increase the volume of data, you can increase the number of use cases, which increases the value of the business case. It increases the level of ambition that you can have inside delivering these projects. what we're talking about is being able to analyze and plan at the level the businesses makes decisions and at the right frequency. So before we kind of shuttled all these processes to sort of monthly, quarterly, and half yearly, but now we're talking sort of daily frequently, maybe even more, in terms of pumping the data, this information supply chain through these platforms, which again just completely changes how you can think about the value you can add to the organization in terms of business case. So when we think about the range of capabilities, and I could have put more complicated transitions on this very boxy slide, but if you just look at the orange box in the middle, so kind of traditional enterprise performance management, so consolidation and reporting, budgeting and planning, allocations, statutory reporting. So these were the sort of classic traditional EPM, the scope of the EPM tools and software. So we've been able to do this for years with technology. We bought different tools for different jobs. And it's still the core of these new generation of platforms as well. So that is still the core, but they're a single platform. It becomes a single tool for all of those capabilities. But in addition, you get all of the stuff that's above that orange line as well. So all of those white boxes, so it's balance sheet reconciliations and attestations, predictive capabilities, tax provisioning, people planning, all of this capability sits inside the platform that you're investing in. So once you buy your user license, you have access to all of these different capabilities, which really increases the range of value you can add. Because that's kind of where we thought it was in the emerging trend, the one that I mentioned a second ago, that's really where things start to get interesting and fundamentally more powerful, is this ability to hold and load, or to load and hold a significantly greater data set down to sort of transactional and maybe even operational level detail. That increases the amount of analytics you can do, and it increases your ability to be able to then cover these operational planning and forecasting, so this XP&A. And that's fundamentally a bigger business case that's far more ambitious. And if you haven't come across it before, I'm including now just one example of a project that we're doing at the moment that is XP&A focused. And if we look at the business value box, so the type of questions the project is trying to answer, so understand what drives variations in profitability, what a P&L impact is going to be, what happens if the launch is poor versus planned versus actual, making sort of total cost of ownership decisions. Should you make something or should you buy something? How to optimize an internal value chain. These are questions we just couldn't get anywhere near in the past because we just didn't hold anywhere near enough granularity in the data to be able to answer these questions. And as soon as you change the granularity of data, as soon as you try and aim at these types of questions, they become relevant and interesting outside of finance for across the organization. So here's where we see some of the other interesting points on the slide. So classically and traditionally, the sponsor here is the CFO. What we see on this one is that the CEO and the CIO are also major stakeholders inside this project because the value is organization-wide. We're looking at the forecasting for the entire value chain, so market through production all the way to finance. It's sort of 40 plus source systems that are being integrated, 500 million records. This is the one I was mentioning before. All of these things are fundamentally different in terms of scale and complexity, therefore also value, than we're ever doing in the past. And I really like the sort of clarity of the ambition on this one, which is very, very simply, they're trying to do more, go further for less effort. So it's a really simple goal to kind of understand and get your head around. So that was the kind of the main bulk of the points I wanted to make to really characterize this seismic shift and kind of what it means. So it's based around technology, but it's not all about technology. So there are a few points I mentioned just in closing and to summarize before I'll invite Steph to come on. And that's the first one, is to consider technology to be a platform rather than a suite of applications. So even if your need does come from to fix a consolidation problem or budgeting and planning and forecasting, it's to be aware that the business case can be bigger than that, because the budgeting and planning tool you look at is also a market-leading consolidation tool and a market-leading balance sheet reconciliations tool or a market-leading people planning tool. The capabilities are far greater, plus it can store this operational detail for analytics and BI capabilities. So these are platform technologies with far greater capabilities than we've ever had available in the past. That leads to more transformational value that can be found inside the business case, across the enterprise from finance out. That means we also need to think of data as a supply chain of information, and the finance's role to be able to govern that process, govern the data, apply the controls to it, do it at speed so it's valuable to the organisation at the granularity the organisation needs to be able to make decisions. And then finance can play its role, or you can enable this role of kind of coach and advisor to the organisation. And that's how I think finance can continue to sort of shift itself and then gain and add more value to the organisation. So that was the a quick introduction to what we think is this seismic shift. You can feel free to drop us a line, and then there's a lot more detail that we can put out to talk about the market of tools and technologies that are available, and the sort of greater thinking we have around how you build the business case where you could search for value, what are the implications of trying to do some of these things. So you can let us know, and I'll be more than happy to talk sort of slightly slower in a bit more detail. So now the section we're going to come on to, I'll invite Steph to come back on, and then we're going to end with a Q&A. So I'm going to ask some questions of Steph, and then hopefully, well, we will definitely have some time for some questions from you guys as the audience as well. So welcome, Steph. Thank you very much for taking the time to share some of your perspectives on this. Why don't you just start with an introduction to yourself and your organisation?
Oh, thanks, Ash. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Sapa. I'm the FP&A director at Howden Broking Group. So just to give you a bit of background about Howden, we're a retail and specialty insurance broker. We also have a MGA arm called Jewel, and also a data, digital and analytics arm called HX. As a group, we're very geographically diverse. We're very global. We've got offices sort of all around the world. We're very fast growing, highly acquisitive. I've been at the group for nearly 9 years, and I can say the group has changed quite a lot since I first started back in 2012. So yeah, it's a very, very fast-paced, fast-growing company, and certainly keeps us on our toes.
Very good. So probably the best place to start, Steph, is at a high level, could you describe the scope and objectives of the project you've done so far?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, when implementing a new system, when we went with OneStream, we wanted to utilize the capabilities of OneStream to enhance our our finance processes, our usual finance reporting, consolidation, FP&A, etc. But I think more broadly speaking, it was around enabling us to have greater control around our processes and our use of the system, which we didn't have in our previous system. Enabling better standardization of our processes, increasing our automation, helping provide more visibility of our data, increasing our accuracy of data, and also helping speed up the time it takes for certain processes and activities in our finance cycle. For instance, our budget cycle has taken a number of months in large chunks of the year, to be honest, in previous years and previous systems. So we're really looking to help utilize OneStream to help speed up these things, and using sort of the tools within to do so, and leveraging then with that time that we're saving on these sort of manual processes to help create data and better insights and better analysis on the data, which we haven't really had lots of time to do in the past. So that's really, I guess, what we've sort of set out to do, or why we've gone down the path of OneStream.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, and you've touched on some of them there anyway. But are there any sort of other benefits that you've seen? What are the sort of most significant changes you think you've seen as a result of this new technology platform implementation?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned, better accuracy, better visibility of data, it's definitely been a benefit. Smoother month-end consolidation processes, again, it's really helped take some time away from that because we just have better control and visibility of what's going on in the system. The system itself is quite an integrated, has an integrated and powerful reporting tool. So we can get, quicker and slicker views of our data, which we haven't been able to do in the past, and also has helped allow us the opportunity to better integrate with other systems. So after our front office systems, our broking systems, our general ledger system, our HR system, etc. In the past has been quite difficult to do that. So it's certainly quite a big benefit of OneStream.
Yeah, okay. And this is a difficult one, especially as we've all spent a year not really walking around and seeing people. But have you heard any comments that people have made, or do you have any observations around sort of people and their behaviour regarding the new platform?
Yeah, I think yeah, as you mentioned, probably having overhearing comments is a bit difficult these days. But
It's a bit more difficult, yeah.
yeah, in terms of an observation, I think overall, I feel people are much more across the business and not just within finance, are very engaged with the platform, and are taking more time to see where they can utilize the platform to create operational efficiency gains in their teams, in their processes. With our previous system, that was sort of not an option for us, something people wouldn't take the time to do. So I feel yeah, overall there's just better engagement across our company with OneStream.
Yeah, okay. It's I mean, I like to do recognise it's hard to sort of see these things in action, but it's I'm always really interested in the people side of it. It's really easy for us to talk about the data. In fact, the next question I'm going to talk about is data,
Mhm,
but it's often the one we sort of start off thinking we're doing this around a people agenda, but it's the hardest one to sort of remain true to. But
mhm,
going back anyway towards data,
mhm.
you've mentioned a bit about the sort of insight and analytics capabilities, and that being one of the drivers of the project, that being part of the scope. But can you describe, so for the people listening, some of the things that you can do now that you couldn't do or that were more difficult to do in the past?
Yeah, sure. So I think some of the key things are around automating some processes and automating our actual reporting outputs, which has helped us really speed up just our general month-end close, consolidations, budgets, etc. Also allowing us to have better insight as to what's actually going on. Um, the way that the system sort of manages the data has helped us also identify different reporting layers and allow us to produce more automated reporting for things that we wouldn't have been able to do in the past. So, for instance, we have different views for management level reporting, financial statutory reporting, external bank investor reporting, which we can do sort of simultaneously, and it's very easy to bridge from one to the other. So just having that visibility is a huge benefit for us. And also the ability to sort of drill down and identify the data source of our data and inputs much more clearly than in the past.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of what's also we're looking at next to do, one area we'd like to sort of look at next is the predictive analytics marketplace app that OneStream offer. As I've mentioned, we have quite a onerous budget cycle, and we really think we would like to leverage what that app can do in terms of modeling or predicting a forecast or a budget. Maybe not to replace our process entirely, but to enhance it or help provide like a rolling forecast view that we can easily sort of refer to without having to spend months trying to put something that's an annual budget together. We're also looking at doing something called operational forecasting, so engaging some more of the front office, the business, to utilize the tool and budget their results at quite a transactional, very detailed level, like income by client, income by policy. Again, things that we haven't been able to do in the system because in the past the system hasn't been able to really cope with that sort of nature and volume of data. And also integrating our platform with other platforms and systems across our business. So as I mentioned, we've sort of looked at the GL and HR systems already, but we're looking to maybe try and integrate our front office system, our broking platform as well.
Yeah, these are all perfect and really interesting points, Steph, actually. So you touched on a couple of things there that I think are really relevant. One of them, the first one, is predictive. I mean, you can't really walk around, or read any thought leadership or watch any webinar without that kind of coming out. But I think the important point for me is to be able to adopt something like that, you need to be on a platform that's ready to take it. So you have to make that sort of upfront investment to get everyone onto this same platform, and then fuel it with the right level of information. Then you can start to sort of trial these new capabilities. And that's almost the perfect point, really, which is once you've made that step, and it is fairly significant. Once you've made it, though, then you can just sort of trial it out. There's no kind of incremental cost, particularly, about this is this capability the platform has, and this is about you trying to see whether it's going to fit and how you might adopt it into your process. And the same with the operational one. Again, like you say, it's the capabilities just didn't exist before. We never used to talk about front office stuff. It was purely only back office, and most of the time we used to say, how can we make the data set smaller? Because the smaller the data set, the faster the thing ran, the less complicated it was. Now we go the other way, which is what else can we put in, because it's got so much more
exactly. And that has actually come out of our initial sort of proof of concept of currently the data is all held in Excel, and the proof of concept that we've looked at is really expanding that and talking to the business and understanding what else do we need, and there's quite a lot else that we do need that the system will be able to to manage, which will be great.
So just flipping back again slightly more towards people and the people benefit. So no matter which way you cut it, there's lots of things you can do to kind of ease this, but it is a new platform. It's a new platform that's different to the old one, and we recognise that the people benefit can be significant. So what sort of things did you guys do as Howden Group to ease or accelerate the adoption of the new platform to get the most from it?
Sure. Well, obviously we've leveraged in Lumi's expertise, but we've also, I think from day one, we made sure we had the right level of support from our key stakeholders and business sponsors. So, making sure you have managing stakeholders is a key aspect to this. We ensured that our finance teams, our finance users, were engaged from day one. Which I think really helped, that they didn't sort of come in too late without any knowledge of what's going on. They were involved making decisions from day one in the design. And as well, I think we've made like quite a big investment in training, not just sort of our central UK-based teams, but globally. And that's also before we went live, and also sort of continuously after we've gone live, which has really helped, I think.
Yeah, I think they're really good points, and certainly my memory of it was there was a significant investment, in the kind of the business case, the requirements gathering, and then even the selection process to choose the platform. For me, that's one of my overriding memories of the effort that you guys put in there is kind of what sort of paid you back along the life of the project. And then certainly when it came to the sort of speed of adoption, was kind of getting the right people understanding and believing and buying into the business case up front, then kind of makes that subsequent change easier, and then also more sustainable at the end. So then going on to what do you think your top tips would be? So if someone's kind of listening, watching this, or is about to embark on a similar project, what tips would you have?
So these are not necessarily things that we 100% stuck to ourselves, but I would recommend documenting a plan and sticking to it as much as possible. And then where there are deviations, naturally there's going to be changes or deviations along the way to the plan, making sure that those are also documented sufficiently so everyone is aware of what's going on, because these projects can take time, and then when you sometimes look back on decisions that were made 6 months ago, a year ago, you can forget why. So making sure things are documented as much as possible is definitely a big tip from my perspective. Making sure that the right people are involved. So as I've mentioned, obviously having the finance users engaged from day one is a very good idea, but also people across the business who are involved in the end-to-end process, and not just finance users, front office staff, people in HR who might work with a system that integrates with OneStream, etc. So just making sure, people in IT, everyone's sort of engaged as to what's actually going on, and as part of as many decisions as possible. And also thinking about what are your key outputs and what are your key reports that you need from a finance perspective, and how do you get there? So obviously focusing on data input and making sure the inputs are correct and the quality of data is, at the level it needs to be, but also thinking, okay, so the data's in there, what does it need to look like when it needs to be presented sort of externally out of the system? So I think that's something key that potentially we looked at quite late in our project plan, but I would recommend thinking about that early.
I think that's actually quite a good one, actually, and hopefully we're all better at it and don't do it quite as much as this now than we did in the past. But in the past, in a way, that one of the reasons you go and make an investment in new technology is because of the reporting you want to do. But then if you look at how much time you spent on the reporting, both up front, like you're saying, and then in the project, it's actually only a fraction of what you spend kind of building the thing and doing the inputs. But really the value is all in the outputs. So I think that's a very good point to make. And then just sort of kind of lifting it up a little bit and thinking about the future. So what do you think the finance function in Howden's going to look like across the next 3 to 5 years? Kind of what's next, I suppose.
So it's a tough question, but so I think, I mean, ideally things we would like to be much more automated than we've obviously still got quite a few manual processes that we do. Be more automated, more dynamic, better ability to self-service, so leveraging system OneStream as much as possible, so that we produce less static reports and everything is much more dynamic and real time for users. And also having not just finance engaged with the system, having the business, so as part of the projects that I said sort of are in scope for our next step, like operational forecasting, etc. We've also got something that we're looking at for balance sheet reconciliations and attestations, which will bring in a sort of different set of users. So having just more users engaged with the system will really, I think, help improve like the data quality and outputs, overall that the system produces.
Very good. Some big and interesting aims indeed. I think the operational one is, it's just not a word that ever really entered the vocabulary, and I've been kind of doing this sort of 15, 20 years ago, until 2 or 3 years ago, where it started to come a bit more and we started to realize that actually there's something we can do here. So I think it's really interesting to see it start to happen in projects, is having that sort of finance out lens. It's a really interesting trend. Brilliant. That was really interesting, Steph. Thank you very much for the time. Mark, you have been moderating. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, there have been, and I'll just try and summarize them because there are quite a few. But Steph, could you describe the systems you had before, just to give people a feeling of what you were using prior to this, how manual it was, Excel or whatever, how you were doing it, how many people you used for the project, because I think that'll lead in quite nicely, and how long overall has the project taken so far?
Sure. So prior to OneStream, we were using a system called Anaplan, which we used for all of our reporting, consolidation, budgeting processes. In some aspects, Anaplan actually worked quite well for us. In others, it didn't at all. Fundamentally, and I mentioned one of our key objectives was better control and quality of data and accuracy of data and visibility of data. Anaplan didn't really allow us that as well as a system, as well as we would have liked in a system, which is essentially what sort of drove us towards OneStream. Sorry, Mark, I can't. Was the other question around the number of users?
Yes,
or the number
thanks.
of people in the project?
Number of people that then, once you've decided, okay, we're going to make a change, this isn't working, how many people did you gather together, both internally and also externally? Then what size of project did you have? And then how long did it take that project to get to fruition?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So Ash actually might help better remember than
Sure.
maybe 30, I would want to say, from internally. It was quite probably a big team, maybe even close to 50. Obviously, some people, weren't around for the entire length of the project because it was carved into a couple of phases, but maybe over the course of the entire project, maybe 50 between us and in Lumi.
Yes, I think a couple of points I'll sort of add in really. So if we think about the nature of Howden as a business, so it's quite federated. That means it has sort of different parts of its business that do slightly different things, and then they kind of come together as the group, and then you have the group function as well. One of the important parts of this project was trying to build something that served the needs of all of the different layers and levels of the organization. So not just from a process perspective, sort of financial reporting, management reporting, budgeting, planning, forecasting, but then also from a country, a region, a divisional, and then a group perspective. So it was really trying to look at all of the things because it wanted to take the most out of it. And by doing that, you needed to be able to add value for different reasons at different places. So that's why you end up with sort of the size of the number that Steph is talking about there. So it probably was in the region of sort of 30 to 50 people at varying levels. So some of these they're not building anything or writing reports. They're just actively involved in the project because they're going to be actively involved in users and part of that sort of dissemination process. I think we had I'd say the core team was around the sort of 15 mark when we think about the SMEs and people that did sort of project type activities. And then externally, there was sort of 5 people from OneStream and then Lumi on the project at sort of various levels of loading, but at its peak 5. And then I think the final point was around timeline. So I'd say it's probably about an 18-month timeline end to end, but the first phase was about 12 months, and then the subsequent phases were shorter.
That's right.
Because,
yes.
Yeah. So you're looking about an 18-month that kind of got the core consolidation, so the financial consolidation, management reporting, budgeting, planning, forecasting. That was about 18 months, with 12 months to the first go live, and then the subsequent go lives were a bit faster because it's not a new platform. You don't have to train new users on a new technology, just on the new process. Therefore, the time to value is quicker. Sorry, Steph.
And also, I was about to say some of the processes ran in parallel. So the phase 2, even though it sounds like it was 6 months, it was probably actually started while sort of phase 1 was ending. So there's a bit of parallel activity.
Yeah, true. There was definitely an overlap. So the way we think about the projects now, one of the keys to this is the data model. So if it is a single platform, like it is with OneStream, what you're doing is creating a data model that works for the different levels of granularity for different areas of the business and different processes. So you kind of get the upfront model right, and then you can do the detail for the financial consolidation, and then extend that detail for the budgeting, planning, and forecasting. And that's what creates the overlap that Steph's describing there.
Super, thanks. One just quick question, if I may, about that. There's obviously, you talk about number of projects and obviously a common data model. How do you make sure that the data is siloed or kept? You want to bring it together, but at the same time, some people mustn't be able to see certain bits of data. How do you achieve that?
So, I mean, feel free to add in, Steph, but the specific functionality inside OneStream that allows you to do that is something called extensibility. And that's the sort of secret sauce, if you like. It's the thing that allows you to design a model that works at different levels of detail. So some of it is about not allowing people to see things they shouldn't have access to. A lot of the time, it's mainly around usability. So when you've got a level of granularity, it's not that it's super secret and no one can see it, it's just kind of clouds the picture and there's detail you don't need. With something like extensibility, that's how you sort of manage that level of detail. It allows you to say yes to those bits of the business that are kind of maybe smaller and interested in different things. So if you think about federated businesses or down to a country level versus a region, a division and a group, you just need to see different numbers. So you can manage that detail using extensibility. So you can put in the level of detail that's relevant for one area of the business and then hide that detail using extensibility for other areas of the business.
I think in Howden we use a combination of both managing security and access as well as the extensibility.
Cool. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yes, it does. Just got a couple more. As I say, I'm trying to encapsulate a number of points that people have made. So apologies to those raising the questions. I hope I'm getting the sentiment correct. One quick one then around this. So obviously these projects have a cost associated with them, and obviously with things like the pandemic, people might be worried about this. How do businesses implement change affordably? What advice would you give to a finance team with a legacy system feeling a bit cash strapped potentially?
Hopefully we haven't made them sound too expensive. I think the way I would start to answer that would be, yes, they're a platform. Yes, they can do sort of 10, 20, 30 different things, but that doesn't mean you need to boil the ocean all in one go. And it doesn't mean you need to, in fact, I wouldn't recommend you try to do everything all in one go. There's definitely things you can do in parallel to get more out of it, but you don't have to do everything at once. So one way of managing the cost is definitely to phase it. And I think in that phasing is the other way you manage the cost, which is you're not trying to implement a new technology for every other different problem that you're trying to build on top of this platform. It's the same way of doing things, built on the same data model, the same way of getting information out into it, the same way of getting information out. So the way I would answer the question is you build that capability in the first phase of the project. Therefore, you can own a far greater share of the problem going forward. Therefore, the cost of implementation of the subsequent phases is far more greatly reduced. So the first thing is you don't need to boil the ocean all in one go. So you don't have to start massive. You can start with small problems and build. The second one is as you build the capabilities internally, you're kind of less reliant on more expensive external help for subsequent phases. That would be my answer anyway.
Good. Okay, thanks for that. One more question, if I may, which is what opportunities for talent management do you see the change of a system offering?
To be honest, I think a lot of this is around kind of mindset. What you're trying to do is change behaviours, and I'd say the fundamental focus really is cutting down on the boring stuff to leave more time for the fun stuff, the stuff where finance can really add value to the organisation, whether that's the model building, the storytelling, the interpretation of results, the levers that can be pulled for improvement, for helping people in the organisation outside of finance understand performance. So they're the sort of higher value adding tasks, more interesting ones. So I think in a way it can be a self-managing problem, which is if you can reduce the time you spend on the more laborious data crunching processing tasks, you've got more time to do the interesting things. People are going to learn more, they're going to develop quicker, the roles are going to be more interesting and add more value back. So I think it's one of those sort of virtuous circles, if you like, which is if you cut down on the boring stuff, you have more time for the fun stuff. The more fun stuff is more valuable, it's more developmental. I think that's how you change behaviours, that's how you can make the roles more attractive and kind of bring in the best and keep the best inside the teams. Something like that anyway, in an ideal world.
So could you see it as a means of changing to attract new talent, potentially? People are often worried about talent, but it could be that it actually allows you to gain new talent because people hear you're using a new system.
I would say that's definitely part of it. I mean, I think it's always cultures of organisations, how they come across. It needs to be very personable more than anything else. I don't think a technology platform in its own right would sell the job to someone, but the nature of the role itself would be different and more interesting as a result of technology. So I think that's the important thing, is which is a finance function investing in the latest generation technology in order to allow more time for the sort of fun bits of the roles. That fundamentally changes the sort of specification of the roles themselves, which inherently makes them more attractive and more interesting. So it's a catalyst or an enabler of that, I think.
Great, thank you for that. So last question, I think, probably, because I've asked a lot of different questions, but hopefully this gets, I can actually, hi Steph, keen to hear more about your common data model. Does this extend to your source systems, e.g. GL?
Our one stream model, our one stream system. Yes, it does. It's integrated with our GL system. So we use a system called Unit 4, and there's an automated link between the two. I think there's a next phase we need to go. So what the system doesn't yet allow for is a total drill back to transactional detail in our GL, but in terms of pulling trial balance level information from one system to another, that's an automated process. But our next step is sort of drilling back to that transactional level, which is something that we're looking to do next.
Yeah, so I think the only thing I'd add to it is, so yeah, in terms of the sort of common data model point, so the design of the data model in OneStream is built around and on top of that Unit 4 model. So yeah, the one encompasses the same level of granularity. And then as Steph is saying there's some transactional level detail that comes across today for a few bits around sort of FX sensitivity, organic growth. But as Steph said, well, it sounds like their plans are to do more of that going forward.
Okay,
very good.
I think that's all we have, really. I hope everybody, I'll answer people individually as well on follow up, but I think that's covered most of the questions that have been asked.
Great. Well, thank you very much for looking at those questions, Mark. That was really useful for us. And Steph, thanks a lot for the time. That was really useful, very interesting.
Thank you.
Great. And well, that's everything for the webinar. So I will hit stop and yeah, you can enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you very much for the time. Bye.